Have you ever noticed that some of the kindest people you've ever met are also some of the most tired people? The ones who always show up, who always smile, who always say yes when you ask for help. But if you look closely enough, if you really pay attention, you can see the exhaustion in their eyes. You can sense that somewhere behind that kindness is something deeper, something heavier, maybe even something darker. We often imagine kindness as this pure, uncomplicated good. We tell children to be kind. We admire kindness in leaders. We measure our own humanity by how much compassion we can extend. But kindness, like everything else in this complicated world, has a shadow. And when you ignore that shadow, when you pretend it doesn't exist, kindness itself can turn into something destructive. It starts small. A child learns that being kind, being agreeable, earns them love. When they put their own needs aside to make others comfortable, they are rewarded with smiles, praise, maybe even affection they didn't receive otherwise. Over time, this association buries itself deep inside their nervous system. Kindness becomes survival, and the older they get, the harder it becomes to separate who they are from what others expect them to be. They become the reliable one, the good person, the friend who never complains. But here's the truth. When kindness is forced, when it is driven by fear of rejection or a desperate need to be valued, it's no longer pure kindness. It becomes a mask. And masks, when worn too long, start to suffocate the person beneath them. Think about the people in your life who are endlessly kind. They'll listen to your problems for hours. They'll help you move. They'll lend money they don't have. They'll sacrifice their own rest just to make sure you're okay. At first, it feels admirable, even saintly. But if you've ever been that person, if you've lived that role, you know the truth. Behind every act of self-sacrifice is a quiet resentment, a voice that whispers, "What about me?" But that voice is often silenced because kindness, especially chronic kindness, comes with an unspoken rule. You're not allowed to put yourself first. Psychologists have studied this phenomenon, and it has a name: compassion fatigue. It describes what happens when someone gives so much of their empathy, so much of their care, that they eventually run dry. Healthcare workers experience it, teachers experience it, even parents experience it. But it's not only about professions. Everyday people, those who identify as kind souls, are at risk too. Studies show that people who consistently prioritize others over themselves report higher levels of anxiety, depression, and even physical health problems compared to those who maintain balance. Kindness, when unchecked, becomes self-erasure, and that's the dark side. Kindness without boundaries is not kindness at all. It becomes a subtle form of self-destruction. It's like watering every plant in the garden except your own roots. Eventually, the gardener collapses and the entire garden withers with them. But here's the more unsettling part. Sometimes kindness itself becomes a weapon. And I don't mean in the obvious way, like someone pretending to be nice to manipulate others. I mean the quieter, more unconscious way. When you are known as the kind one, people start to expect it. They rely on it. They shape their behavior around it. And without even realizing it, your kindness teaches others that your needs are secondary, that your feelings are negotiable. Over time, people stop even asking what you want because they assume you'll always adjust to them. The kind person ends up training the world to overlook them. This creates a paradox. The kinder you are, the more invisible you become. And invisibility is not peace. It's loneliness stressed up in politeness. Now, none of this means that kindness is bad. Far from it. Genuine kindness is one of the most beautiful forces in the world. But there's a difference between kindness that flows from abundance and kindness that bleeds from emptiness. One heals, the other corrodes. One comes from love, the other from fear. Let's look at some facts. In a study published in the Journal of Personality and Social Psychology, researchers found that people who struggle to say no, often those who identify as kind and agreeable, are significantly more likely to experience burnout. Another study out of the University of Berkeley showed that altruistic behavior increases well-being, but only when it is voluntary and authentic. When kindness is performed out of guilt, obligation, or fear of disappointing others, it has the opposite effect, actually lowering happiness and increasing stress. And yet, so many of us get trapped in this cycle. We don't want to disappoint anyone, so we keep saying yes. We don't want to be perceived as selfish, so we keep giving. We don't want to lose love, so we keep sacrificing. But the cost of this endless kindness is enormous. Slowly, you begin to lose sight of yourself. You don't even know what you want anymore because your entire identity has been built around serving others. You become a stranger in your own skin. And here's where the monster within comes in. Because when you suppress your needs, when you deny your anger, when you bury your boundaries in the name of kindness, those emotions don't disappear. They collect in the shadows, they ferment, and eventually they come out in ways you can't control. Maybe it's snapping at someone you love for something small. Maybe it's passive-aggressive comments, resentment that leaks out in subtle ways, or maybe it's even darker, years of repressed feelings exploding all at once, leaving you shocked at the person you've become. We like to imagine that kindness protects us from darkness, but in reality, kindness without honesty creates the perfect breeding ground for it. Because every time you say yes when you mean no, every time you smile when you want to cry, every time you hold back your truth to make someone else comfortable, you are not being kind. You are abandoning yourself, and abandonment always has consequences. Now let's be real. Why do we do this? Why do kind people struggle so much with boundaries? The answer lies in our culture. From a young age, many of us are conditioned to believe that kindness equals worthiness, that being agreeable is safer than being authentic, that love is earned by what we give, not by who we are. Children who grow up in environments where love is conditional, where affection depends on performance, obedience, or self-sacrifice, often carry this belief into adulthood. They become adults who confuse people-pleasing with kindness. But true kindness does not erase the self. True kindness includes the self. If your kindness is costing you your mental health, your joy, your energy, then it's not kindness anymore. It's self-neglect dressed as virtue. And this is where the education comes in. Neuroscience tells us that the brain has something called the mirror neuron system. It's what allows us to feel empathy. When you see someone in pain, your brain lights up as if you are in pain too. That's why kindness feels so natural to us as humans. We are wired to connect. But here's the catch. Mirror neurons don't distinguish between healthy empathy and destructive empathy. If you constantly expose yourself to others' suffering without any boundaries, your brain essentially floods itself with stress signals. Over time, this leads to chronic stress responses, immune system issues, and emotional exhaustion. In other words, your brain is not built for endless, boundaryless kindness. It's built for balanced connection. So the dark side of kindness is not that kindness itself is bad. It's that kindness can be twisted by fear, by conditioning, by culture, by our own unhealed wounds, into something that looks noble on the surface, but slowly eats us alive inside. And when that happens, the very thing we thought was our greatest strength becomes the very thing that breaks us. Now let's pause and reflect here. If you've ever felt this, the exhaustion, the resentment, the sense of being invisible even though everyone calls you so kind, you're not alone. You're not broken. You're not defective. What you're experiencing is the natural consequence of a world that doesn't teach us how to balance giving with protecting ourselves. It's the monster within, not because you're bad, but because unexpressed truths eventually demand to be seen. And this brings us to the real question. How do we embrace kindness without letting it destroy us? How do we stay compassionate without turning into martyrs? How do we love others without abandoning ourselves? So, how do we do it? How do we embrace kindness in a way that heals instead of harms? The answer lies in one simple but deeply uncomfortable truth. Kindness must begin with you. Not in a selfish disregard for others kind of way, but in the sense that if your kindness doesn't include yourself, then it isn't truly kindness at all. It's performance, and performance eventually collapses. Think of it like this. If you've ever flown on an airplane, you know the safety instructions. In an emergency, put your oxygen mask on first before assisting others. At first glance, that advice feels almost wrong, almost unnatural. Why would I not help my child or my loved one first? But the logic is undeniable. If you pass out from lack of oxygen, you can't help anyone. The same principle applies to kindness. If you neglect your own needs, your own rest, your own well-being, your ability to truly care for others eventually suffocates. This is where boundaries enter the picture, and boundaries for many kind people feel terrifying. Boundaries feel like rejection. They feel like selfishness. They feel like shutting people out. But in reality, boundaries are the purest form of honesty. A boundary says, this is what I can give, and this is what I cannot. It says, my love is real, but it cannot exist if I'm empty. It says, I care enough to show you my limits, because without them, my care will rot into resentment. Psychologists describe boundaries as the invisible lines that define where you end and where another person begins. Without those lines, relationships blur into dependency, manipulation, or silent suffering. With them, relationships become clear, mutual, and grounded in respect. In fact, research shows that people who set healthy boundaries often experience deeper, more meaningful relationships because their kindness comes from choice, not compulsion. And here's another fact. People who respect their own boundaries are actually seen as more trustworthy. Why? Because when they say yes, you know they mean it. Their kindness isn't forced, it's authentic, and authenticity is magnetic. But here's the challenge. Setting boundaries isn't just about saying no to others. It's about saying yes to yourself. And that can feel uncomfortable if you've spent your whole life equating worth with selflessness. It can feel like you're betraying the very identity that people admire you for. You might even lose relationships in the process. Some people won't like it when you stop overextending yourself. Some will push back, accuse you of changing, maybe even withdraw from you. And that's painful, but it's also necessary because relationships built on the expectation of endless giving were never truly balanced in the first place. Now let's dig a little deeper into the psychology. There's a concept known as pathological altruism. It describes what happens when the desire to help actually causes harm, either to the giver or the receiver. For example, when someone sacrifices their health to care for others, or when constant rescuing prevents the other person from ever learning independence. Pathological altruism looks like kindness, but it creates dependency, guilt, and exhaustion. It is quite literally kindness gone wrong. This ties into something even bigger, the cultural myth of the good person. Many societies idealize kindness as the highest virtue, but often in a way that subtly encourages self-erasure. Think about how often we hear phrases like, "She's such a good girl, she never causes trouble," or "He's such a nice guy, he always helps everyone." Hidden in those compliments is a dangerous assumption that goodness means never making demands, never saying no, never disrupting the peace. But real goodness is not about erasing yourself. It's about showing up as your full, authentic self and still choosing compassion. When kindness comes from authenticity, it liberates. When it comes from fear, it enslaves. So what can you do practically to shift from enslaved kindness to liberated kindness? Here are some strategies, not as quick fixes, but as lifelong practices. First, practice the pause. When someone asks something of you, don't immediately say yes. Take a breath. Give yourself space to check in with your own needs. Ask, do I have the energy for this? Do I want to do this? Is this request aligned with my values? Even a few seconds of reflection can save you from automatic people-pleasing. Second, learn the power of gentle no's. A no doesn't have to be harsh. It can be compassionate and kind. I care about you, but I can't take this on right now. Or, I'd love to help, but I don't have the capacity. The world won't fall apart if you say no. In fact, the more honest you are, the more people will respect your yes. Third, reframe your worth. Your value is not determined by how much you give away. Your value is intrinsic. You existed before anyone needed you, before you learned to perform kindness to survive. You are worthy of love, even when you say no, even when you rest, even when you take nothing on your shoulders. Fourth, tend to your own garden. Fill yourself with the things that nourish you, friendships that feed your soul, creative pursuits, moments of stillness. When you live from abundance rather than scarcity, kindness flows naturally. It's not forced. It's not depleting. It becomes a gift rather than a transaction. And fifth, allow yourself to feel the harder emotions. Anger, frustration, sadness. These are not enemies of kindness. They are signals. They tell you when your boundaries are being crossed, when your needs are being ignored. If you suppress them, they morph into the monster within. But if you acknowledge them, if you listen, they become guides that point you toward balance. Let's return to the metaphor of masks. For many people, kindness has become a lifelong mask, the smile you wear to cover the exhaustion, the yes you give to avoid conflict, the generosity you perform to prove your worth. But masks are heavy, and the longer you wear them, the harder it becomes to remember what your own face looks like. The real journey is not to throw away kindness, but to remove the mask and let kindness come from the real you. The you that can say yes and no with equal honesty. The you that is kind without disappearing. There is an old saying, if you want to know who you truly are, look at how you treat yourself when no one is watching. That's where authentic kindness begins. Not in the approval of others, not in the praise of being the nice one, but in the quiet choices you make for your own well-being. Do you rest when you're tired? Do you forgive yourself when you fail? Do you speak to yourself with compassion? If not, then your kindness to others is built on a fragile foundation. The irony is this: when you treat yourself with true kindness, your kindness toward others becomes more powerful, not less, because it comes from overflow, not depletion. It inspires rather than exhausts. It invites others to rise with you instead of lean on you endlessly. And maybe that's the final lesson here. The dark side of kindness isn't about rejecting kindness. It's about transforming it from a mask into a mirror, from compulsion into choice, from survival into love. So the next time someone tells you that you're so kind, pause for a moment. Ask yourself, is this kindness coming from fear or from freedom, from exhaustion or from abundance, from the mask or from the real me? The answer to that question will tell you more about yourself than any compliment ever could, because at the end of the day, the monster within kind people is not their anger, not their limits, not their boundaries. The real monster is self-neglect. And once you face it, once you set down the mask, you'll discover that your kindness doesn't disappear. It only grows stronger, sharper, more radiant. It becomes the kind of kindness that doesn't just keep others alive, but keeps you alive too. And maybe that's the ultimate kindness, to live fully as yourself, without erasing, without performing, without apologizing, to show the world that compassion doesn't mean self-erasure, it means truth. That's the kind of kindness the world needs most. Not endless yeses, not silent suffering, but the courage to love without losing yourself.